Hello, friends. I'm obviously new here, but my grandpa just died and I'm feeling kind of strange in that way you get when you're in so much pain, you don't want anyone around, yet at the same time, paradoxically, you kind of want the comfort of some sort of community. I've been sitting on this since Friday, trying to figure out what to say, or how to communicate what's on my heart. I keep catching myself glancing out the window, my mind drifting around aimlessly. I'm stuck in some kind of endless stream of consciousness. Which of course makes writing and communicating a little difficult, tedious task. So please forgive me if things get a little tangential. I lived alone in northern Michigan since early 2018. But since my grandpa got sick last year, I spent a lot of time back home in the lower peninsula surrounded by family, counting down the weeks and days. These past couple weeks have been particularly difficult as my grandpa has spent the better part of his time in and out of consciousness. Last Thursday afternoon, he went to sleep and never woke up before he officially died on Friday morning. It was on the cooler side that morning, but pretty too. The leaves are changing, the air has a certain fragrance to it. Fall is suddenly upon us, and I can't help but wonder if this time of year will remind me of my great loss for decades to come. Fall feels more like death to me now. How leaves only change because they're dying off for the year. But there's something pleasant and nostalgic about it too. It's hard to explain. I suppose part of this has to do with my grandpa's chance encounter with Charles Manson in the fall of 1967. When I was a kid, my grandpa liked to tell stories about the time he spent in California when he was in his 20s back in the 1960s. It was after he spent his time in the service post-Korean War. He grew up in an extremely rural part of Montana. I think that's what he said. So once he left the service, he wanted a little adventure in his life. I guess he just wanted to be happy, just like anyone else. He got a job changing reels in a movie theater and wrote film reviews for San Francisco area newspapers and magazines. He aspired to be a journalist, but without much of an education, he kind of just toiled around for a while. At some point, he went hunting with a buddy in a forest somewhere outside San Fran. He enjoyed hunting and did it relatively often, but there was something about this particular trip he'd never forget. When my grandpa Rich, his buddy, came to a clearing on the side of a hill that descended into a sort of bowl, there was a group of people at the bottom sitting around a fire. It was late afternoon, so it wasn't yet dark. But my grandpa described the feeling as a kind of gray pallor that fell over the area, as if he knew who the bearded guy and all these girls were and what they'd come to do in the not-so-distant future. The guy stood up, smiled, and welcomed my grandpa and Rich to sit down. He was altogether quiet, friendly, and personable. If a little he asked to try on my grandpa's horn-rimmed glasses and to hold his rifle, so my grandpa obliged. Manson put on the glasses on and pointed the rifle up at the treetops and just stared down the sights. Finally, he said something like, "Aren't the trees so pretty?" As if wearing the glasses had helped him see the forest in a new way. Grandpa and Rich ended up sleeping over with Manson and his girls. My grandpa said they smoked pot and talked about music and pottery and the movies and war until they finally just fell asleep under clear, unseasonable, warm skies. When he woke up the next morning, Manson was leaning against the tree with his legs crossed at the ankles. Just overall, nonchalant and relaxed and friendly. He was picking his teeth with something that my grandpa thought was a straightened-out paperclip. He asked what Grandpa and Rich were going to do now, and my grandpa said, "I guess we're off to find a good kill." And Manson apparently thought this was funny, so they all shared a laugh. To think that my grandpa once laughed in unison with Charles Manson gives me the creeps. But it's kind of cool in a weird way, too. It wasn't until later, when Grandpa saw Manson's face on TV, that he realized the people he met in the forest were the Manson family. He said they shocked him, sure, but he couldn't say he was completely surprised. Apparently, while they were high, they talked about violent films they'd seen or books they'd read, and Manson had a strange fascination with how death was depicted in fiction. My grandpa described this as the most interesting part of the conversation because he was always attracted to darker themes too. Trying to think of it, he talked about human darkness all the way up to his death. about how we can learn so much about ourselves and others by reflecting on dark impulses or dreams or whatever. Grandpa moved to Michigan in the early 1970s on a whim, his words. And I'm glad he did, or I never would have been born. I never did find out what attracted him to Michigan of all places, especially since he was generally enjoying his time in California. I asked him a couple months ago, and he was super sick, but he said, "The trees are pretty." And that's what I've been reflecting on for the past few days. In the last weeks of his life, he was thinking about Charles Manson's comment down in that forest clearing. I guess I'd be thinking about some of my most amazing encounters and experiences too. I'd also be thinking about my life's great loves. But Grandpa didn't have much to say about Grandma or my mom. My family and I miss my grandpa very much. He was such a kind guy. If incredibly opinionated and old-fashioned. I recently joked with him that he was so old he actually wore horn-rimmed glasses when they were cool. When they were completely out of style. And finally when they were cool again. He got a kick out of that. He said he didn't want to change. "I can control some things," he told me. "Other things change because they have to." And then he gave me his glasses, because, well, he'd never need them again. The funeral is this Friday. I'm torn between keeping the glasses and burying them with him. I'm also torn about how best to keep the legacy of his simple life alive. He once wanted to be a journalist, and he wrote until he couldn't anymore. Writing was his passion. He wrote movie and book reviews, letters to the editor, journals, and some fiction. Along with the glasses, he also left me a chest full of his old writings. What a cool thing, huh? And yet, I almost feel like I should keep that chest sealed tight, to leave his private thoughts and ideas buried along with him in darkness.